My name is Jim O'Connell. I'm 69 years old, and my joints greet me every morning with a symphony of creaks that speaks to my mileage. Not my age, my mileage. The miles I trudged through jungle mud and the decades I've spent on a cold concrete garage floor. My hands are a map of that life. The skin over the knuckles is tough and cracked like old leather, and a dark rim of engine grease lives permanently under my fingernails, a stain no soap can ever wash away. I look at them, and I don't see an old man's hands. I see the tools that built a life, mine and others. My old 1985 Ford F-150 sits in the driveway like a loyal dog. Its paint is faded by the Ohio sun, and a patch of rust is spreading over the rear fender like a skin disease. But I know if I turn that key, its V8 engine will answer with a low guttural rumble. It's a part of me. We're both from a time when things were made to last, not to break a year after the warranty expires. I see character in that, in the truck, and in myself. I have a house, not just a box of drywall, but a fortress I finished with my own two hands. I remember setting the rafters, hanging the siding, my wife Ellen picking out the paint for the kitchen. Every creaky floorboard here is a story. Every scratch on the furniture is a memory. But since Ellen passed 5 years ago, the house has been filled with a deep, clinging silence. Sometimes it's comforting, mostly it's suffocating. Today I had to leave my quiet harbor. It was Sarah's birthday, my only daughter. That meant a trip to another world, to her new, perfect suburb, where the houses all look the same, like soldiers in formation, and the lawns are trimmed with a precision that suggests a protractor was involved. Every time I turn onto her street, I feel like an outsider, a relic of the past who's wandered into a sterile future. Friends, don't forget to follow the channel and hit the like button so that this story can be heard by as many people as possible. And let us know what city you're from. Their house shone with cleanliness. A white picket fence, a flawless lawn, huge windows reflecting a serene sky. Inside, it smelled of something floral and chemical at the same time. Not the smell of fresh brewed coffee or baking bread, just sterility. I walked in and was met with a flurry of activity. Sarah was flitting through the living room, fluffing pillows. Her husband, Mark, my son-in-law, stood on the back patio by a stainless steel grill that looked like the control panel of a spaceship. Mark worked in IT. He moved pixels around a screen and called it Cloud Architecture Solutions. He was a decent guy, I guess. We were just made of different stuff. He was fiber optics and kale smoothies. I was steel and black coffee. He'd look at my calloused hands with a mix of curiosity and disgust, like an entomologist studying a rare but unpleasant insect. The kids, my grandkids, 13-year-old Leo and 11-year-old Maya, were planted on the sofa. They didn't look up from their phones, their thumbs moving with impossible speed across the glass screens. They were here, but they weren't. They existed in some other digital dimension where I didn't have a password. I sat down in a wicker chair on the patio. It was stylish, but horribly uncomfortable. Sitting there, I felt like an exhibit in a museum of modern living. And here we have Grandpa Jim, a living fossil. He even remembers rotary phones. The ironic thought left a bitter taste. If I had known, I thought, that in my old age I'd be a ghost in their family photos, I would have bought that boat instead of helping with the down payment on this house. I pushed the thought away. That was territory for self-pity, and I wasn't used to trespassing there. Mark flipped the burgers with an air of importance. "How's it going, Jim?" he asked, without turning around. It was the kind of obligatory question that didn't require a real answer. "All right," I said. The pickup's acting up a little. Carburetor needs a cleaning. Carburetor? He chuckled. God, I forgot words like that still existed. Everything's fuel injected now, Jim. The computer decides. My pickup will start after a nuclear blast, I muttered under my breath. Your shiny SUV will die if a satellite falls out of orbit. Just then, Leo tore his eyes away from his phone. He was looking at me with a new, unfamiliar interest. Grandpa, what's that thing under your collar? He asked, nodding toward my chest. I always pinned my Bronze Star ribbon bar to my shirt for Sarah's birthdays. It was my quiet tribute, my way of saying thank you for the simple fact that I have a daughter and a day to celebrate her. I instinctively touched the ribbed ribbon. Memory is a tripwire. You can walk past it for years and then one careless move, one question, and everything blows up. It's a medal, son. My voice came out unexpectedly loud. For my service. I served in Vietnam. The word Vietnam hung in the air, shattering the pastoral idyll. Sarah froze with a plate in her hands. Mark stopped fussing with the grill. Whoa, Leo said. There was more than just curiosity in his voice. It was the genuine interest of a teenager whose idea of war was shaped by video games. Was it scary? Like Call of Duty scary? I chuckled. The comparison was naive, but the question was real. He wanted to know, and for the first time in many, many years, I felt that I could and wanted to tell him. Not about heroics, not about how I became a hero, but about what it was really like. So he would understand that war isn't a kill count on a screen. The fear over there was different, Leo, I began, choosing my words carefully. It wasn't a jump scare in a horror movie. It was quiet, like the humidity that seeped into every pore of your body and never let go. It was in the leeches you'd pull off your legs by the dozen after every stream crossing. It was in the smell of rotting leaves that followed you even in your sleep. The real fear was in the silence, the ringing silence of the jungle when you knew it wasn't real, that something was out there watching. I decided to tell him not about death, but about a life the war had cut short. We had a guy in our platoon. We called him Slick. He was from Brooklyn. A great kid, always cracking jokes. He could tell a story that would have us all in stitches, even when we were hungry and soaked to the bone. He dreamed of going home and opening his own burger joint. He'd describe in minute detail the kind of burgers he was going to serve, with double cheddar, caramelized onions, and a secret sauce his Sicilian grandmother had passed down to him. He made it sound so damn good our mouths would water, even as we were choking down tasteless sea rations. I saw Leo listening. He had put his phone down. His eyes were locked on me. There was no fear in them. There was understanding dawning. He was starting to see me not just as his old grandpa, but as a young man sitting in the mud, listening to stories about burgers and dreaming of survival. And in that very moment, just as a fragile thread of connection was being woven between me and my grandson, it was ruthlessly severed. Dad? Mark cut in with a tight, false smile. He walked over, lifted a perfectly grilled patty from the grate, and placed it on a bun. Maybe let's not, huh? Don't want to ruin the mood. I fell silent, stunned. What is it? I asked, though a cold hollowness in my stomach already told me the answer. Well. Mark looked at Sarah for backup. She immediately stepped to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder, presenting a united front. Dad, she said softly, and that gentle softness was sharper than any blade. These stories, they're really too much. They're not appropriate. Maya is still so young. Why does she need to hear this? I glanced at Maya. She was in the corner of the patio, headphones on, watching some video of dancing cats. She hadn't heard a single word I'd said. Leo asked, I countered, quietly but firmly. Yes, but you know how kids are. They're curious, Mark said, a note of superiority in his voice. It's our job as parents to filter the content. Besides, it's a birthday party, a celebration. Let's not talk about things that are so grim and depressing. Grim, depressing, inappropriate. The words hammered at my head. My life, my youth, the memory of a boy who never got to open his burger joint. All of it was dismissed as inconvenient, mood-killing trash. A deafening silence fell. Leo stared into his plate, his face flushed with embarrassment. He felt the awkwardness, but didn't dare defy his parents. I felt something inside me that had been stretched tight for years, like a wire, snap with a resounding clang. I had been silent for 40 years. I was silent when I came home, because my country was ashamed of that war. I was silent because Ellen asked me not to bring the war into our home. I was silent because I thought my actions, my work, my care, my reliability would speak for me. But now, when I tried to crack open the door to my past just a little, they had slammed it shut in my face, catching my fingers and my soul. I slowly, painfully, pushed myself to my feet. My knees creaked in unison with the wicker chair. You're right, Sarah. My voice was calm and even, devoid of all emotion. It was as if someone else were speaking. Sorry to have ruined the party. I should probably get going. Dad, what are you doing? Stay. We're about to have cake, she exclaimed. But in her voice I heard not regret, but a vast, poorly concealed relief. No. I looked first at Mark, then at her. I saw the same thing in their eyes, a desperate wish for me to disappear and take my inappropriate world with me. I'm tired, getting old. I'm going home. I didn't say goodbye. I just turned and walked across their perfect lawn to my old pickup, which was parked on the street like an orphan because their shiny SUV took up the entire driveway. I got behind the wheel. The familiar smell of gasoline and old vinyl hit me and felt like the most honest scent in the world. The engine turned over with its usual, reliable roar. In the rearview mirror, I saw them already huddled around the table. Mark said something, and Sarah laughed. The ghost at their feast had departed. And as he drove away, for the first time in decades, he felt not bitterness, but a cold, steely rage. I realized I had been silent for too long. I had swallowed more than I should have, and now the lump of it was stuck in my throat. It needed to come out. The drive home took 15 minutes on the clock, but an eternity by my internal chronometer. Every traffic light, every turn felt surreal. The world outside my truck's windshield was living its own life. People hurrying about their business, laughing, talking on their phones. And I was driving in my old metal capsule, separated from them by an invisible wall. The wall of that inappropriate past. The crunch of gravel in my driveway brought me back to reality. My house, my fortress. It greeted me with its familiar silence. Since Ellen passed, silence had become a permanent resident in these walls. Usually, it was peaceful, like an old cat dozing in a sunbeam. But today, it was predatory, snarling from the dark corners and pressing on my eardrums. Without turning on a light, I walked into the living room. Dust motes danced in the slanted rays of the setting sun, settling on the dark wood furniture we'd bought back when Carter was president. Everything here was real, substantial, scarred. A scratch on the coffee table. That was little Leo, at 3 years old, deciding it was the perfect racetrack for his new metal car. A faded spot on the arm of my chair. That was where I'd spilled hot coffee, dozing off after a night shift when Sarah had chickenpox, and I'd been up for 2 days changing her compresses. This house was a living chronicle, a chronicle of my labor, my love, my life given to them. I sank heavily into my worn-out armchair. The springs sang their familiar, creaky song like an old man's sigh. And there, in the twilight silence, it hit me. Memories flooded in an unstoppable torrent. Not of Vietnam. No, that was too distant. Memories of what came after, of the long 40-year war I had fought right here, on peaceful soil. The war for my family's well-being. I came back from the jungle in '71. No one met me with flowers or a band. At the airport, people averted their eyes and some college kids in tie-dye shirts shouted baby killers at our backs. I went back to my old factory job, the one I had before the army, but the foreman, avoiding my gaze, mumbled something about downsizing. I knew it was a lie. They just didn't want to deal with a guy who had the 2,000-yard stare. They were afraid I might snap. Standing there at the factory gate, I made 2 vows to myself. First, I would never again ask anyone for anything. Second, my family would never know what it was to be in need, and I kept that oath. I got a job at Joe's Auto Body during the day, and at night and on weekends, I unloaded freight cars or took any cash job I could find on construction sites. I slept 4 or 5 hours a night. My hands, accustomed to the cold steel of an M16, quickly got used to the hot metal of car bodies and the weight of a sledgehammer. Ellen worked double shifts as a nurse. We barely made ends meet. But when Sarah was born, I knew barely wasn't an option. I had to do more. I remember it so clearly. Her first day of school. All the girls wanted these pink backpacks with Disney princesses on them. They cost $20, a fortune for us back then. That month, Ellen and I lived mostly on oatmeal and potato pancakes, but Sarah went to school with the prettiest backpack in her class. I saw her eyes shine as she showed it to her friends, and that feeling, her childhood joy, was more satisfying than any steak. Forgotten sacrifices and invisible labor. Yes, those were the words. No one saw my double shifts. No one counted how many times I stitched up my work boots instead of buying new ones, because Sarah needed money for a school trip or dance lessons. It was considered normal. It was my duty as a father. I wasn't looking for medals for it. All I expected was a shred of respect. When Sarah graduated high school with honors and announced she wanted to go to a prestigious private college out of state, it took my breath away. The tuition was astronomical. I realized our savings wouldn't cover the first semester. I had one treasure, my pride and joy, a 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle, bright red with white racing stripes. I'd bought it as a junker and spent 3 years, bolt by bolt, restoring it in my garage. It was my only hobby, my escape. I put it up for sale. I told Ellen and Sarah it was too old, a gas guzzler, impractical. I was lying. As the buyer, a pleased-looking kid in a leather jacket, handed me a wad of cash, I felt like a piece of my own flesh was being torn away. But then I'd look at the photo of Sarah in her graduation gown, holding her diploma, and I knew it was worth it. My daughter, the first in our family with a college degree. Wasn't that a victory? And then came Mark. Smart, promising, from a good, well-off family. He loved Sarah, and I was genuinely happy for her. But from the very first day, he looked down on me. At my working hands, my modest home, my simple jokes. I was part of the scenery for him, a backdrop for his perfect life with my daughter, a living relic to be tolerated out of courtesy to his wife. When they decided to buy their first house, That picture-perfect one. They were short on the down payment. The amount was significant. $50,000. I had the money in the bank. Our nest egg, as Ellen called it. Money I had saved for our old age. In my dreams, I'd buy a small aluminum fishing boat with a motor, and Ellen and I would go up to Lake Erie for a week, just fishing, like my dad and I used to do. It was my dream of peace and quiet. I went to the bank, withdrew every last cent, and gave it to them. "Dad, we'll pay you back. With interest," Sarah chirped. "Don't worry about it," I said firmly. "Consider it a late wedding present. Just be happy." I gave them my dream of a boat, and years later, they told me my memories were inappropriate. The irony was so thick and toxic it choked me. I had given them my past, the Chevelle money, my present, years of labor, and my future, the dream of a boat. And in return, they denied me the right to my own memory. I sat there, in the dark living room, and the images flickered before my eyes like an old film strip. My cracked, blood-blistered hands after a shift on a construction site. Ellen's tired but endlessly loving face greeting me with dinner at 2 in the morning. Little Sarah's peeling laughter. The shiny red hood of the Chevelle disappearing down our street forever. These were the invisible bricks I had used, without sparing myself, to build the walls of their well-being. And now, I found myself outside those walls, an unwelcome guest in the house I had helped to build. There was no anger, just an all-consuming, icy void, and bitterness. The bitterness of knowing that the most important, hard-won part of me, the part forged in the fires of Vietnam and tempered by decades of hard labor, had been deemed not just unnecessary, it had been deemed indecent. As the first rays of dawn pierced the blinds, I was still in the chair. I hadn't slept a minute. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked at my old, faithful F-150. It stood there, solid as a rock. It had never let me down, unlike people. And at that moment, looking at the patch of rust on its fender, I felt the ice inside me begin to crystallize. The void filled not with warmth, but with a resolve as cold and hard as gunmetal. If they didn't want my oral history, it would become a written one. If they wouldn't listen, they would read. To write the truth, I had to go back to it. Not to the memories of sold cars and double shifts, but much further, to the very beginning, to the place from which I returned a different man. To that green, humid, death-breathing hell that on the official maps was called the Republic of Vietnam. My sanctuary became the garage. Here, amidst the smells of metal, spent oil, and sawdust, was my world. An orderly, logical, and honest world. On the walls, tools hung in perfect order. Every wrench, every screwdriver knew its place. Here, things obeyed the laws of physics, not the whims of human emotion. I set up a stepladder and struggled to pull down a heavy dark green metal army footlocker from the rafters. The lock was rusted shut. I had to break it off with a hammer and chisel. The lid opened with a protesting shriek. Inside, resting on a layer of yellowed cotton, lay the artifacts of another life. A bundle of letters from Ellen, tied with a faded ribbon. A few photographs, their colors washed out by time, my old Zippo lighter, engraved with the crooked motto, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for I am the meanest son of a bitch in the valley." And a few trophies that now just seemed like pathetic junk. A Viet Cong flag taken from a dead soldier and an ammo belt. I picked up one photo. It was us. 4 skinny, gaunt kids in faded, filthy fatigues. We had our arms around each other's shoulders and were grinning at the camera, trying to look cheerful. I was 19 in that picture. Next to me stood Slick, the kid from Brooklyn with the dream of a burger joint. On the other side was Doc, our medic, a huge guy from Texas who would read the 91st Psalm before every patrol and could set a splint with 2 branches and a bootlace. The fourth was Skipper, our sergeant. He was only 23, but to us grunts, he was an old man. It was his second tour. His eyes in the photo were already the eyes of a tired old soul. The photo was taken a week before that fateful day. A week before our little brotherhood ceased to exist. I closed my eyes, and the sharp smell of oil in the garage was replaced by another, the thick, all-pervading smell of the jungle. It wasn't just the smell of wet leaves. It was a heavy, cloyingly sweet cocktail of rotting orchids, damp earth, wet moss, monkey droppings, and something else. Something elusive, metallic. It was the smell of fear. The choppers dropped us in the Ashau Valley. The Marines who'd been there before us called it the Valley of Skulls. The monsoon season had turned the earth into a solid swamp, a viscous, sucking mire that pulled you in up to your knees. The humidity was 100%. The clothes on your body never dried. They just rotted, growing patches of mildew. Your skin underneath would break out in sores and ulcers. And the leeches. God, the leeches. They were everywhere. In your boots, under your clothes, in the murky water we drank after filtering it through a bandana. You had to burn them off with a cigarette, or that Zippo. The real war wasn't the firefights. They happened, yes, but rarely. Most of the time, the war was an exhausting, nerve-shredding wait. We just walked, for days on end, in complete silence. The only sounds were the squelch of our boots in the mud, the maddening buzz of insects, and the frantic pounding of your own heart in your ears. Every dry twig that snapped underfoot made you hit the dirt, expecting a shot. Every rustle in the undergrowth could be the start of an ambush from which no one would return. It was in that deafening silence, in that constant tension, that true friendship was born. We didn't speak in grand terms about brotherhood. We just shared the last swig of water from our canteen, even when we were dying of thirst ourselves. We covered for each other when someone had to step into the bush, because that was the most vulnerable moment. We carried the rifle and gear of the guy who collapsed from heat stroke or malaria. Words weren't necessary. Actions were everything. Slick was the heart of our little squad. He somehow managed to keep his sense of humor in a place where there seemed to be no room for it. "Hey, Jimbo," he'd say, pulling another fat leech from his pant leg. "Just pretend it's the IRS coming to collect. Makes it easier to deal with, right?" He talked endlessly about his girl, Maria, showing us her tattered photo, and about his future burger joint, Slick's Burgers. He was our good luck charm, our promise that a normal life existed somewhere, and we would return to it. As long as Slick was spinning tales about his secret sauce, we believed we'd make it out. It happened during a routine patrol. If you can have a routine day in hell. We were moving along a small, overgrown stream. Skipper was on point, probing the ground. I was behind him. Slick was bringing up the rear. I didn't hear the deafening blast you see in the movies. Number. The sound was a dull, wet, disgusting thud, like someone had swung a baseball bat as hard as they could into an overripe watermelon. I instinctively spun around. Where Slick had been walking a second ago, there was nothing. Just a small column of black smoke and mud rising lazily toward the canopy. We scrambled back. Doc was the first to reach it. I saw his face and knew. He didn't even bother to open his red-crossed medic bag. He just collapsed to his knees beside the crater, took off his helmet, crossed himself, and began to quietly recite the Lord's Prayer. Slick had stepped on a bouncing Betty, a small, devious anti-personnel mine. It doesn't explode right away. First, a charge launches it about 4 feet into the air, and then it detonates at chest and gut level, to leave no chance of survival. I don't remember how we gathered what was left of him into a poncho liner. I only remember that his radio, which I picked up from the mud, continued to hiss, as if his soul was still trying to reach us, to finish telling us about his secret sauce. It wasn't just Slick who died that day. A part of me died too. The naive, 19-year-old part that knew how to laugh without a care and believed that everything would be okay. In its place, cold steel grew inside my soul, and silence took root. And there, standing knee-deep in the mud of the Aishau Valley, I made a silent vow. If I ever got out of this hell, I would live a life for 2 people, for myself and for him. I would build a home. I would raise children. I would work so that every minute of my life had meaning. I would live that simple, normal life he dreamed of, with no complaints, no whining, just getting up in the morning and doing what a man is supposed to do. That was the story I had wanted to tell Leo. Not about the blood and guts, but about a promise. About the debt of memory owed to a funny kid from Brooklyn. About how every backpack I bought for Sarah, every nail I hammered into the walls of my house, was part of fulfilling that vow. That my boring, inappropriate life as a retired mechanic was, in fact, a living monument to him. And it was that story, that monument, that my daughter and her husband had called grim and depressing. They didn't just silence me. They devalued my vow. They laughed at the memory of Slick, and that I could not forgive. Not for my sake. For his. I opened my eyes. It was completely dark in the garage, save for the dim light from a street lamp filtering through the dusty window. On the workbench, I found an old spiral notebook and a ballpoint pen. Chapter 1, I wrote. My hand, so used to a wrench, trembled as it tried to control the thin pen. My name is Jim O'Connell, but that wasn't my only name. In 1970, in the Aishau Valley, they called me Cherry, because I was the new guy. This is the story of how Cherry had to die so that Jim could live. A week went by, a week of deafening silence. The phone in the kitchen was dead. No call from Sarah, no brief text from Mark. Their tactic was clear to me. Let the old man cool off, get over his tantrum, and then pretend nothing happened. They didn't understand the most important thing. I wasn't boiling over. I was freezing over. With each passing day, the ice inside me grew thicker and stronger. I spent that entire week writing. From the moment the sun came up, I would retreat to the garage, sit at my workbench, and write. The pen scratched, filling page after page. I was pulling the splinters of memory out of my mind, one by one. Some were sharp and painful. Others were dull and aching. I wrote about fear that smelled like rot, about a friendship more valuable than gold, about a loss that leaves a hole in your soul that time can never heal. I wrote about coming home and how the war doesn't end when you step off the plane. It just moves from the jungle into your head and wages a guerrilla war in your dreams. I thought the humiliation at that family party was the worst it could get. I thought I had already hit rock bottom. I was wrong. The real, crushing blow was yet to come. The bottom had a false bottom. It happened on a Wednesday. I had driven into town to the supermarket to restock. When I got back and turned onto my street, my heart sank. Leo was sitting on my front steps. He was hunched over, his arms wrapped around his knees, rocking back and forth. They had dropped off my grandson and left him like a puppy at a shelter. I killed the engine and got out of the truck. "Hey, Grandpa," he said. Not looking up, his voice was muffled. "Hey, Leo, what's wrong? Where are your parents?" "Mom said I should hang out here for a few hours. She and Dad have some important work meeting. She called, but you didn't answer." I nodded, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. An important meeting? Of course, they couldn't even be bothered to wait for me. They just dropped the kid off and left. I was once again a function for them, a free babysitting service. "Well, come on in then. No point sitting out here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Inside, he was unusually quiet. He wandered from room to room, looking for a long time at the old black and white photos on the walls. Pictures of my parents, of a younger me, of Ellen. It was as if he was searching for an answer to some question of his own. Then, he sat down at the kitchen table where my open notebook lay. "What are you writing, Grandpa?" he asked. "My memoirs," I answered simply. "About the war." That same keen interest was back in his voice. "About the war, and about what came after." He was silent for a moment, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, and then he said, the thing that was the second final shot to my head, the thing that shattered the last remnants of my old world. "You know, Grandpa," he started, stammering, "after we left that day, Dad said you were wrong to be upset, and that you exaggerate everything. He said that a lot of old guys, especially vets, like to tell tall tales to make themselves seem more important than they really are." I froze, holding a cup of cold coffee. Every word hit me like a piece of shrapnel. Exaggerate. Seem more important. It wasn't just Mark justifying himself to his son. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded assassination of my credibility, my truth. He hadn't just shut me up. He had painted me as a lying, bragging old man in the eyes of my own grandson. He had poisoned the well from which we both might have drunk. But that wasn't all. The abyss was deeper. And also, Leo's shoulders slumped and he stared at the table. They were laughing. That night, at some video. "What video?" I asked, though an icy dread was already creeping through me. He silently pulled out his phone. A few quick taps on the screen, and he held it out to me. It was a TikTok. A short, 15-second stupid video, filmed by Maya. That day, at the party. The shaky phone camera was pointed at me. I was sitting in that wicker chair, my face serious as I talked about the leeches and slick. Some idiotic, high-pitched music had been laid over it. A caption in multicolored letters ran across the bottom. My grandpa going on about his Vietnam flashbacks again. And the worst part, a filter had superimposed huge, cartoonish, streaming tears onto my face. I stared at the screen, and the world narrowed to that small, glowing rectangle. In the background, I could clearly hear laughter. The loud, boisterous laughter of Mark, and a high-pitched giggle, Sarah's giggle, my daughter's. She was laughing at her father as he tried to share the most sacred and terrible truth of his life with her son. I silently handed the phone back to Leo. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing was even. Something inside me clicked, a loud, dry, and final click, like the cocking of a rifle's hammer. This was the point of no return. All this time, my silence had been my strength, my shield. I was silent to protect them from my past, to protect myself from their lack of understanding. But they had mistaken my silence for weakness, my restraint for submission, my sacrifice for something they were entitled to. They hadn't just forgotten what I had done for them. They had started to mock who I was. They had taken my soul, my pain, my memory of a dead friend, and turned it into a 15-second joke for their followers. "Grandpa?" Leo's voice pulled me from my stupor. "You okay?" I looked up at him. He was scared. He didn't understand the full depth of what had happened. He was just the messenger. It wasn't his fault. "I'm perfectly fine, Leo," I said in a completely calm, icy voice. "Perfectly. You know what? Come on out to the garage with me. Got a little project you can help me with." I had to act, not scream, not accuse, not break things, but act, calmly, methodically, and unstoppably, like a surgeon removing a cancerous tumor. I was no longer the ghost in their family photos, and I sure as hell wasn't a clown for their TikToks. I am Jim O'Connell, a veteran of the Vietnam War, and I was about to take back my name and my dignity. Action. That's what always put the ground back under my feet. Not words, not emotions, but simple, methodical action. When you're doing something with your hands, your head doesn't have time for self-pity. That evening, after a flustered Sarah arrived, collected Leo, thanked me curtly without meeting my eyes, and drove off, I didn't return to my memoirs. I sat down at my massive kitchen table, switched on the lamp, and its yellow light pulled another notebook from the gloom, an old accounting ledger in a worn, cloth-bound cover. It was where, out of the habit of an old mechanic who loves precision, I had for decades recorded all major expenses and debts. I've never been a petty man, but I was a man with a good memory. I opened to a page headed 1995. In neat, faded handwriting, it read, "Payment for Sarah's first semester of college, $8,500. I slowly turned the pages, the entries flashing by like fence posts from a train window. Textbooks, dorm fees, plane tickets home for Christmas, sophomore year, junior, senior. I did a quick calculation in my head. The total, not even accounting for inflation, was approaching 6 figures. It was the price of a small house in our neighborhood. I found an entry from 2012. Wedding gift for Sarah and Mark, $15,000. That was the money from the sale of my red Chevelle. I could almost feel the cold keys in my palm again as I handed them to the new owner. And finally, the most recent major entry, 2017. Help with down payment on house, gift, $50,000. The money I had saved for the boat, for my quiet, peaceful retirement on Lake Erie. I looked at these dry figures and felt no satisfaction, no desire to demand anything back. I felt a cold, sobering clarity. These weren't just dollars and cents. These were units of my life, translated into a financial equivalent. They were sleepless nights at the garage, hours I hadn't spent with Ellen, strength I hadn't spent on myself, dreams I had voluntarily surrendered for their future. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my closet and took out my only good suit. A dark, gray wool. I had only worn it a few times in my life, for Sarah's wedding and Ellen's funeral. I polished my old dress shoes until they shone, put on a white shirt and a tie. When I looked in the mirror, a stern, unfamiliar old man looked back at me. I drove into town, not to their house. My old pickup rumbled down Main Street and stopped in front of a modest brick building with a brass plaque. Henderson and Sons. Attorneys at law. Mr. Henderson Sr. was a lawyer as old as the hills who had handled my father's affairs. He was cut from the same cloth as me. He spoke little, listened carefully, and got things done. I sat in the creaky leather chair opposite his massive oak desk, and without a word, placed my accounting ledger before him. He put on his thick horn-rimmed glasses, and for a long time, silently, page by page, studied my entries. He didn't ask questions. He just read the chronicle of my life. Then he took off his glasses, cleaned them with a handkerchief, and looked at me over the top of the desk. "Jim, what do you want to do?" "I want to change my will, Frank," I said firmly. "Everything I have, this house, the land it's on, my modest savings, I want it all sold at auction after I'm gone. And the money—" I paused, gathering my thoughts. This was the most important decision of my life. I want to establish a trust, a named trust, in the name of Corporal Michael Slick Del Vecchio. The fund will provide financial assistance to Vietnam veterans and their families in our county, help with unbearable medical bills, help fixing a leaky roof, small scholarships for their grandkids' education, something real, something that matters. Henderson was silent for a long time, tapping his fingers on the desk. Then he slowly nodded. "That's a noble thing, Jim. A very noble thing. But Sarah, she's your only daughter. She and the grandkids will be left with nothing." "I know," I replied, my voice unwavering, "and I love her very much. But love and inheritance are not the same thing. Love does not give you the right to be disrespectful and cruel. I built a life for her, where she never had to sacrifice anything. I gave her everything while I was alive. Now I want to help the guys who sacrificed everything, including their lives, and got nothing in return but to be forgotten." The lawyer picked up a pen and a fresh sheet of paper. "All right, Jim, I understand. I'll prepare the necessary documents." But that was only the first step. The paper step. The second step required more courage. When I got home, I didn't go back to the memoirs. I went into Ellen's study, which had been left untouched since her death. I blew the dust off her old Underwood typewriter. I didn't trust computers with their soulless delete key. I wanted every word to be struck onto the page with physical force, for every letter to leave its mark. I rolled a clean sheet of paper into the carriage and began to type. It wasn't a letter to Sarah or Mark. It was a letter to the editor of the local paper, the Evening Herald. I didn't complain. I didn't accuse. I wrote an essay, a short one, just one page. I titled it, "The Price of Silence." In it, I didn't mention a single member of my family. I wrote in general terms about a whole generation, about the generation of men who returned from a war their own country chose to forget as quickly as possible, about how we learned to be silent, so as not to wound our loved ones with stories of horrors they could never understand, about how we channeled all our unspent energy, all our pain into work, to build a better, safer, more comfortable world for our children. I wrote about how this new, better world, with its fast technology, social media, and shallow judgments, sometimes forgets the foundation upon which it stands, a foundation mixed with our sweat, our blood, and our silence. We do not ask for glory or gratitude. I hammered out on the keys. We, the silent generation, ask only for one thing. Do not make us ashamed of our truth. Our stories may be harsh, prickly, and inappropriate, but they are the very price that was paid for your soft, convenient world. When you ask us to be silent about our past, you are not just erasing our memories. You are erasing a part of your own history, and a house built on a forgotten and mocked foundation cannot stand for long. I finished the letter, folded it, sealed it in an envelope, and drove it to the newspaper office myself. I didn't know if they would print it. To be honest, I no longer cared. The important thing was done. I had broken my 40-year silence, not with a cry of despair, but with a measured, firm, and considered word. I had taken back my voice. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence, but of a different kind. Not oppressive, but filled with anticipation. I finished the first part of my memoirs and waited. I wasn't waiting for their reaction, but for some sign that I had done the right thing, and the sign came. On Thursday morning, the phone rang. It wasn't the lawyer, and it wasn't the newspaper. There was a choked sound on the other end. Then I heard Sarah's trembling voice. 35 missed calls. A silly thought crossed my mind. Like in that video, as I remembered I'd had my phone on silent for days. Dad? Yes, Sarah, I'm listening. Dad, she repeated, and I heard a sniffle that turned into a sob. We got an official letter from Mr. Henderson about the change to the will. Dad, how could you do this to us? To your own grandchildren? I was silent. I let her pour it all out. She cried. She screamed. She accused me of unthinkable cruelty, of robbing her children of their only inheritance, their family home. I listened to her accusations and was astonished. She talked about the house, the money, the walls. Not a word about the reason. Not a word about the video, the laughter, the humiliation. When her flood of words dried up into quiet sobs, I answered calmly. I'm not taking anything from anyone, Sarah. I've simply decided to give what's mine to someone who might appreciate it. But this is our home. You always said it would be mine. I said a lot of things, I interrupted her, gently but firmly. And then I saw a TikTok video. I heard my only daughter laughing at her father's pain. An inheritance isn't just square footage, Sarah. It's the ultimate form of respect and trust. You showed none. Period. Silence fell on the line again, but this time it was a stunned silence. I didn't know you saw that, she whispered. It was such a stupid, idiotic joke of Maya's. We didn't think. That's exactly it, Sarah. You didn't think. To you, it was a joke. To me, it was a betrayal. I said the words without malice, as a simple statement of fact. I have to go. I have work to do in the garage. And I slowly, deliberately, hung up the phone. For the first time in my life, I had ended the conversation with her. I had drawn a line in the sand. 2 days later, in the Saturday edition, they printed my essay. Not buried on some back page, but on the front page, in the editor's column. My phone began to ring off the hook, but it was other people calling now. Bill, who I'd served with, though in a different unit, called. He just said, "Thank you, Jim. You said it for all of us." The widow of our sergeant skipper called. She cried and thanked me. Complete strangers from our town called, whose fathers and grandfathers had also been through Vietnam and had also been silent. It turned out my silence had a huge, multi-voiced echo. That evening, they came, the whole family. Their SUV pulled up to my house and sat there with its headlights off. Then they got out and walked in a single file line to my porch. They stood there, in the dim glow of the porch light. Sarah with red, swollen eyes, a completely lost and bewildered Mark, who for the first time was looking at me, not with condescension, but with fear. And the quiet children, hiding behind their parents. I didn't invite them in. I just came out onto the porch and sat in my old, creaky rocking chair. "Dad, forgive us," Sarah began. We were horribly wrong. I read your article. I didn't understand anything." Mark mumbled something incoherent about acting like a complete idiot, that he hadn't thought, that he offered his most profound apologies. I looked at them as if they were strangers. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a vast cosmic weariness. "It's not about forgiveness," I said quietly. "Forgiveness is too simple a word. It's about understanding. You can't erase what you did. You can only try to understand why it was wrong. And then something happened that I didn't expect. Leo took a step forward, out from behind his father. "Grandpa," he said, and his teenage voice cracked. "I read your article in the paper too, and I'm really ashamed. Can I read your memoir when you finish it? Please." I looked into my grandson's eyes for a long time, and in them I saw not idle curiosity. I saw sincere, deep remorse, and a desperate desire to understand me, his grandfather. In that moment, I knew that my personal war, the one I'd been fighting for the past few weeks, was over. I hadn't won. I had simply defended my territory, my right to my memory, and my dignity. "You can," I nodded. "When I'm done, you'll be the first to read it." I didn't change the will back completely. The Corporal Michael Slick Del Vecchio Foundation would be established. That was my unshakable debt to him. But I asked Henderson to make one amendment. The house, this fortress built with my own hands, would go to Sarah, but with one legal condition: that they could never sell it or mortgage it. And that on the fireplace mantel, next to their perfect, glossy family photos, there would now and forever be one small, modest frame, with a faded photograph of 4 skinny, smiling kids in dirty fatigues, taken in the Ashau Valley, as a permanent reminder of the foundation, of the price. They left in silence. I stayed on the porch, listening to the crickets chirp. For the first time in many years, I didn't feel alone. I had won back more than just respect. I had won back myself. The next morning, I did something I'd been thinking about for a long time. I rolled a rusted, dusty chassis of a 1968 Ford F-100 out of the back corner of the garage, a truck I'd bought for pennies at a farm auction. It was in terrible shape, almost hopeless, but it had a solid frame, a good, honest foundation. I turned on an old radio, and the raspy voice of Johnny Cash poured out. I picked up a wrench, and the familiar smell of rust, gasoline, and oil filled the air. I began to work, to disassemble, to clean, to restore. Not just the old truck, but myself, my new, reclaimed life. I knew I would finish the memoir, and Leo would read it. Maybe one day, he would even understand something. Not everything, but it would be enough. And for now I had my work, and a quiet, peaceful Ohio sunset, and country music from an old radio. And for the first time in many, many years, that was more than enough. I was free.